Mythic Light Studios presents A Dream of Dragons, written and narrated by Harley and Vanessa Hunt. Prologue, Beginnings. Pressing the cold edges of his thumb to his cheek, Therin felt his skin recoil from the sudden chill upon the air. Muscles ablaze, he struggled as he held the bow's taut string, which was quickly straining his still-developing form. Yet he redoubled his efforts and focused ever defiant to impress himself upon his father. Rapidly he looked on through the thicket of trees and snow at the frozen silhouette of a deer, ever searching for the coming threat. Counting his breaths as he was always taught, Therin carefully timed the release of his bow just as he had done 1,000 times before, but unlike those many preceding attempts, the snow now began to fall about him in a seemingly strange manner. Breath settling to its last count, Therin began to fight the indecision suddenly running havoc within himself. The fear of missing, fear of taking a life, and definitely scariest of all, the fear of disappointing his father held him at bay, until in that frightful moment a branch snapped from past his peripheral. Startled, the string he had been holding so tightly suddenly slipped through his fingers with naught but a wisp, and the arrow loosed. It flew hard but skewed, piercing the deer's upper back leg, sending it into a frantic run-off into the brush. Turning with fear to face his father, Therin felt sure that he was going to get a lecture, but to his surprise his father just looked on towards the direction of the fleeing deer. A long and enduring moment held sway upon the air, and Therin grew more nervous with every passing second. Where was the coming lecture? Strangely, his father hadn't even seemed displeased. If anything, he looked content, maybe even happy.
Come, my boy. We shouldn't let it get too far. If we linger any longer, it may become too difficult to find its tracks in this snow.
Agenor spoke calmly as he turned gathering the clustered bags, tossing the smaller of the two to his son. Leaning his small bow on a tree, Therin hastily pulled the bag over his back before quickly reaching for the resting weapon. Heart pounding about his chest, Therin eagerly set off after his father, his bow swinging by his side. Methodically walking through the snow, Therin thought it best to remain quiet, as he wished not to poke the self-imposed effigy of a slumbering bear he had so erroneously drawn atop his father's apparent happy demeanour. Time passed, and slowly his worries slipped from his mind as the sheer beauty of the Amberwoods overwhelmed him. Sure, he had plenty of fun in the snow back home, but this was the first time his father had allowed him to accompany him so far. Sure, he had ventured near its edge, but never did he dare go so far as to lose sight of the farmstead. He could never have imagined how spectacular it would look and feel up close, embalmed in its thick covering of snow. From time to time, a pocket of snow would fall from the trees, and soon the sound of running water began to be heard over the whistling wind. The trees began swaying rhythmically, taking on an otherworldly quality. The air convulsed and darted about, swirling around the trees in all but random directions, and soon so did he begin swaying to the rhythm of the shifting forest as if possessed by its spirit. Feeling maligned to the motions of his physical body, Therin frantically attempted to wrestle back control, but quickly learned that the harder he pushed, the more the world seemed to push back. Therin quickly realized this and feared he would soon be overpowered by panic, yet in that moment he decided instead he would use all that he had left to dictate his next act. With great exertion, he tried to force a cry from his mouth, but the very air left it fleeting upon his tongue. At a complete loss, Therin could do little but consider what could be happening to him. Might he have fallen unconscious by some unknown means, and was he now dreaming, or rather more truthfully having a nightmare? Yet as soon as the thought passed through his mind, he quickly considered whether it mattered, for the wind still howled about, and he was still unable to move his body to action. As if knowing he was at the edge of his limits, a sudden and frightful sound of water washed over his ears with a great crash. Its mighty waves seemed to thrash about as if embroiled in a mighty battle of the ages. Faltering upon his feet, Therin's vision began to spin moments before his legs, suddenly buckled beneath the weight of all the sounds without, and all feelings within fighting for preeminence. Suddenly it all stopped, freezing as if the world had come to a standstill. Hoping the world had returned to its normal state, Therin looked up, seeing only the snow-covered canopy of swaying oaks and a deep, rich field of clouds staring back at him. Catching the rare ray of sunlight slicing through, Therin watched, unable to summon the strength to pull himself up. Slowly his father came into his peripheral, a slight smile betraying his near-constant expression. Kneeling down, Agenor placed a hand on his shoulder and sat him up.
Calm your heart, my boy. It's the forest. The same thing happened to me when my father brought me here for the first time, albeit a little less dramatically.
He finished with a little chuckle, pulling Therin to his feet again.
My father laughed for days when I missed my first deer.
Agenor continued as Therin brushed away the snow.
There is something different to these woods, though I'm not sure of it myself, and no one has been able to explain it to me sufficiently either. Most don't even feel it, but those of us who do, all agree it's intoxicating.
Agenor paused for a moment thinking.
I don't know. Any description would be pointless unless you have felt it yourself. In time you will understand.
Agenor pondered further, looking deeper into the forest.
Come, we shouldn't fall too far behind. The deer could collapse at any time.
Therin took in all that he could as they stumbled through the forest, mind racing. What was it his father was trying to say? What did he mean it was the forest? It made no sense. Was he talking about magic? He had only ever read about those strange mystic arts in a few of the books his father had hidden away above the rafters at home. Again the wind howled, and the nearby half-frozen stream began to thaw. The finer detail in the trees began to highlight, becoming clear and vivid. The air wasn't just howling, it was dancing, and Therin could now see the motion clearly, and he quickly fell in step with the world moving around him. Strange floating particles began to pop in and out of the air, swaying and bulging until suddenly he and his father felt wholly separated from the wind and snow of the world. Perhaps, Therin wondered, might this be what father might have meant? He could still affect the world by the means of a simple interaction like the sway of a hand, but something more was seemingly happening before his eyes. It almost felt as though he could move the air by will alone, and as if bidden to do so by the forming thought, the wind instantly obeyed his wish, parting the falling snow like a curtain. Soon the trees began to whisper, quietly at first, but before long they were billowing and wailing in an odd, cumbersome speech that filled the space in its entirety, effectively denying all other sounds from being heard. Fearful of the voices in the deep and worried something was feeling very wrong, Therin shuffled towards his father, who was himself staring towards the north, seemingly looking at some place past the thick row of trees. Waiting for a short time, the voices began to fade away, leaving only an eerie silence where once the cumbersome speech filled the air. Alarmed, Therin turned from his father and looked to the north, watching for the slightest change in the distance. Even the smallest objects soon glistened with detail, ostensibly captured by his apparent enhanced senses. Moments passed that seemed an eternity when suddenly a large spear of ice burst through the forested cover and embedded itself into a tree only a fraction of a metre from his father. The tree wailed as the spear suddenly cracked apart and shattered as it fell to the ground. Once again the forest burst into a shouting match. Grasping at his ears, Therin did all he could to filter through the noise as his eyes darted back to his father. In the echo of the spear's passing, Agenor had already leapt into action, firing his powerful bow mid-stride. In the distance, a shattered screech yelled out, but instantly another great spear leaped from the forested cover. This time it grazed Agenor's left arm, shearing his bow in two. Instantly letting it drop, Agenor pulled his axe from his side with his right hand and grabbed Therin with his left. Bursting into a frighteningly fast sprint, Agenor ran as fast as he could, hurling southward through the deep snow-covered realms of the Amber Woods. Agenor knew he would have to choose his moment with great care and precision, for whatever pursued them had thrown that spear with impossible strength, yet retained such accuracy that all but the most prestigious archers would be proud. Therin soon noticed that Agenor was slowing, so he looked over his shoulder to figure out why, yet he found no answer from his eyes. "Father, what's wrong? We have to get back to Mother." Coming to a rough stop, Agenor spun back, refusing to look away from the way they had come, for he feared it was too dangerous. Still poised for action, he breathed laboriously to quickly catch his breath. Yet he knew time was no ally in the current circumstances, and even his well-trained sense and fighting ability were insufficient while protecting the most precious of lives from such a foe of unknown number.
"Therin,"
he said, gasping for air.
"Son, I need you to run as fast as you can home. Tell your mother I love her, but you must all flee to Roland's Gap immediately."
Agenor paused a moment to catch another fleeting breath before continuing.
"I will meet you there later."
"But father, I can't just leave you here," Therin cried. "I don't know the way." Agenor dropped his axe in a ring on his right side and knelt. Pulling the heavy pack from his shoulder, he retrieved a strip of cloth from a lesser pocket. Unfurling the makeshift bandage, he wrapped it around the wound on his bicep, all the while his eyes remained ever fixed to the north.
"Therin, you can do this. It's just as I taught you. Use the shadows cast from the trees and head directly south."
Tears freezing to his face, Therin looked at his father, pleading, "But Dad, I don't want to go."
"Therin, your mother needs you. Now go."
Agenor spoke strongly, pulling the axe free from its ring. A lone figure stepped out from behind the forest's cover, holding a spear of ice pointed forth. Seizing the moment, Agenor lunged forward, throwing his axe with such force that he had clearly caught it by surprise as the axe's head plunged deep into its chest. The strange creature froze as a clear expression of horror writhed across its face, but no longer than a second later its entire form began to shatter into 1,000 pieces as it fell to the snow. Therin too stood paralyzed in disbelief at what his eyes had witnessed, but suddenly his father grabbed him by the collar in an effort to force him to action.
Therin, I love you before all else, my boy, but by the light, go.
The very tears falling from his sentiment soon froze to his face as Therin looked into his father's eyes, but for what he saw in the depths of his father's soul behind his clear love for his family spoke only of fear. A deep abyssal fear, but of what he could only guess. At a loss for what he should do, Therin did the only thing left to him, so turned and ran as fast as his little legs could carry him. Watching only until his son reached the edge of his sight, Agenor turned to collect his axe still plunged deep into a large chunk of ice, now no different from any of the others strewn about the snow. Hand clenched around the handle, he took a deep breath, readying himself for what must come next. In a flash of lightning, Therin burst from the amberwoods just as the heavens began to open. Adrift in the loss and longing to be at his father's side, he turned back, in a vain belief that maybe his father would walk out of that forest and they could finally go home. But deep down he knew there was little more than a cruel hope, and as his heart felt as though it could handle no more, out stepped 9 statues formed of ice. Standing higher than all the others, the centermost figure stirred forward as he raised his arm in a motion to beckon Therin back to the cold embrace of the forest. Daring not move, he stood firm, feeling the full force of the severe cold as his clothes froze to his skin, but to his astonishment the lead figure did not make any further signs he intended to follow. Instead, he made a simple yet alien gesture before shrinking, as if cloaked by darkness, back into the forest, swiftly flanked by his 8 companions. Feeling an incomprehensible wave of guilt, fear, and extreme fatigue, Therin leaned his head back. Above him the sky had turned angry, clouds billowed and riled. A spectacular show of lightning stretched across the horizon, just as a veil of rain suddenly washed the land in a thick blanket of water and hail. The so-called kings of the north, the great mountain ranges that had ever stood vigil over the amber woods and all the lands of the north, had begun to stir and shift. Though slight at first but ever increasing, they lost their crowns of white. Great swaths of the sky began to rip open, breaking the very fabric of the world. For hours he stood unable to turn from the sight as the tears spread far and wide, reaching southward towards the slopes of the tallest of the kings, the mighty dragon's fang. With only a shimmer as warning, the long rips in the sky flickered before dissolving into a beautiful hail of light, slowly fading until there was no evidence that anything had ever happened here. Moments later the thunder and lightning faded, yet not with a bang, but rather a whimper, until only a light rainfall remained to mark the fact that something had happened here. Regaining himself, Therin turned and ran with all he had left, hoping time would see him to his father's side once again. Except from the Book of First Light. In times of wonder and times of change, where in the lands of the north, which known for its stability will the earth suddenly shake, the gentle air will quicken and calm oceans will roar, the great king of mountains will rage and shake, from our world into the next, beckoned upon the frozen air, will a great tear form pathways to a land long forgotten, and mighty rains will fall blanketing the land. For endless days the storm will billow and rage, lightning cracking and thunder booming. The tempest will spread far and wide, sounding a grand orchestra for his coming. For amongst men will the Tal'Doran already walk. The first bell will sound the beginning upon the fallen crown of the dragon's fang, but only an arrow's flight will prove it right. An unlikely kindness will save a life, and courage will quench it tight, yet only in the blood of the first will the pact be bound. The endless march on the realms of man will break the talon, and the gap will fall. Yet given pause will the ice sea be, for upon the walls of old will they be received in thy blazing light. The second bell will ring to howls of wolves, for in the full moon will the creatures of the night hound their flight. Bound by boards and blades will he find each new sight fortified towards the night. Yet to his strength would many flee to join his flight, if only to live past the next night. Darker the day must grow, and bloody will his fangs yet seethe, but onwards he must march, and to the next he must proceed. For in the furnace of his plight might the tale of the dragon's lost night be proved in the receding of the twilight. Yet to the watcher a question remains. How could one so high as he be laid so low by betrayal's deed? But few who still walk this realm know of the songs of old, where in their lyrics lies the fate of it all. For in betrayal and death will he finally known that in his reflection lies the first lord, long forgotten to an eternal slumber. But as the first he is not so easily bound, even for the likes of death. So when he returns from that far-off place, can he be none other than the Ancient One, the Dragon of Time?